A very pleasant morning to all the attendees, esteemed faculty members, and dear research scholars and students who have joined us today. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to the 3-day lecture series on the theme of literature and literary studies, organized by the Department of English and Other Foreign Languages, SRM Institute of Science and Technology, Ramapuram campus, Chennai. Once again, we have a few very interesting and enlightening lectures lined up today and in the 2 days that follow by reputed and learned resource persons. I'm sure that we will have a lot to take away from the upcoming live session, so please stay tuned. Literature teaches us about ourselves. Books and characters within them often hold a mirror up to the reader's faces, appealing to us to make comparisons and see a part of ourselves within some character. Much is also there to learn about the human experience, other cultures and worlds, and literature and literary studies offer the imagery and narrative that in turn boosts creativity and encourages one to pursue new lines of reasoning and a deeper thought process, thus constituting a treasure trove of knowledge. On behalf of the Department of English and Other Foreign Languages, I would like to take this opportunity to present the unique topics of the lecture series. The topic of the live session today is the concept of other in literature by Dr. E. Benet from the National College of Trichy. Day 2 will feature a live broadcast on the topic affect theory and its effect on 21st century literary studies by Dr. Abdul Muhammad Ali Jinnah. On day 3, the topic will be post-colonial aura in the Australian and Canadian literary milieu by Dr. Samuel Rufus from Madras Christian College. Before we move on to the welcome address, I would like to gently remind all the attendees who have joined us to stay with us till the end of the session to access the feedback, and please don't forget to post your queries, if any, in the live chat stream on YouTube during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. I would now like to call upon Dr. Rama, Professor and Head Department of English and Other Foreign Languages, to deliver the welcome address. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Walter. Pleasant morning to all the attendees. I extend a warm and hearty welcome to all of you to this 3-day online lecture on literature and literary studies. The Department of English and Other Foreign Languages, SRM Institute of Science and Technology, Ramapuram campus, strives to keep the learning community connected even during these trying times by organizing webinars to English language teaching and literature. The lecture series is indeed going to be a treat for lovers of literature and very beneficial for the teachers of literature. So to remind those who have joined us late, day 3 will witness a very insightful presentation by Dr. Samuel Rufus, Associate Professor in English, Madras Christian College, on the topic Post-Colonial Aura, the Australian and Canadian Literary Milieu. On the second day, Dr. Abdul Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Associate Professor in English, Jamal Mohammed College, Trichy, will enlighten us with a lively presentation on affect theory and its implications on 21st century literary studies. Today, day 1, we have amidst us an expert in English literature, a name synonymous with net coaching throughout the nation, the inimitable Dr. Benet, Associate Professor of English, National College, Trichy. His versatile delivery, friends, will keep the audience spellbound. Amidst his extremely hectic schedule, he has consented to grace this lecture today as the resource person and deliberate on the topic, the concept of other in literature. We are indeed greatly, extremely indebted and thankful to you, sir. On behalf of our institution, I extend a very hearty welcome to you, sir. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Benet. At this juncture, I hand the session over to my colleague Nathiya for the introductory remark.
Thank you, ma'am. A very pleasant morning to all the participants. First of all, I would like to welcome you all for the 3-day lecture series on literature and literary studies. The mediocre teacher tells, the good teacher explains, the superior teacher demonstrates, the great teacher inspires. By William Arthur Walt. One such great teacher is with us today. It's an honor and privilege for me to introduce the resource person of our 3-day lecture series, Dr. T.E. Benet, Vice Principal and Associate Professor of English, National College, Tiruchirappalli. A name popular in literary circles, he is a well-known writer and he has more than 25 years of teaching experience. We can tell a lot about our guest, but I'd like to mention a few here in this forum. He got UGC National Junior Research Scholarship eligibility as a lecturer chair in 1990. He has attended many training programs organized by various universities and also organized many seminars and conferences. Dr. Bennett has published many journals and books, and here I'd like to mention one which we need to read regularly, that is Net Set Go, published in the year 2015 and revised edition published in the year 2017. He has acted as resource persons for various programs organized by various universities and is a member in board of studies for many colleges. He is a member in various academic bodies and also an examiner for business English in Cambridge English Speaking University. He also a research advisor for MPhil and PhD programs and currently he is guiding 5 PhD candidates. He has also involved himself in various co-curricular activities and finally to conclude with his recent publications in newspapers, the article entitled Graffiti and Gaffes Gallo and The Truth About Lies. Both are published in the Hindu in the year 2017. So we have in our midst a very enthusiastic and knowledgeable person to deliver a very insightful lecture presentation on the topic of other in literature. With these warm words, I request Sir to take over the session and share the knowledge with your enlightening presentation, sir.
Now, thank you for all those warm words at the outset. Let me all greet you. And let me thank the Department of English and Foreign Languages, SRM Institute of Science and Technology, Ramapuram, Chennai, for organizing this 3-day online lecture series on literature and literary studies. And let me thank Dr. V. Rama, Professor and Head at the Department of English and other foreign languages, for inviting me to deliver the first lecture of the 3-lecture series. And let me also thank the coordinator, Ms. Nathiya, for inviting me and asking me to deliver a lecture on a topic of my choice. So I thought I should talk on this topic because the whole concept of other has come back to haunt us again. When we read a novel, for instance, we try to examine the plot, character, narrative technique, or narrative style. Then we look into the different views like first person point of view, second person point of view, omniscient point of view, and we also look into the time, or if it has an imaginary time, we look into the time in which the novel is set or the locale where it is set. And we also try to examine the novel from various vantage points. For instance, we try to examine a work as a sociological one or a psychological one or a philosophical study or simply a speculative piece of fiction or any of this. We try to also examine a piece of literature from the view of what we call subaltern view, or a minority view, or even racial view, and so on. But remember, there are many categorical identities: race, gender, and in the case of India, caste has become a categorical identity. So we human beings are categorized as whites, blacks, brown, yellow people, and so on across the globe. Then we are also divided in the name of religion across the world. If you look into the past history, people had this whole concept of looking at the other as their enemies mostly, say, or unfriendly people, if not as direct enemies, or as unfriendly people. For instance, the Jews always thought of the Gentiles as the other. The Christians thought of the pagans as the other. The Muslims thought of the infidels as the other. People who have to be despised, people who have to be devalued, people who have no subjectivity, or at least according to this dominant group of people. So we have learned to live with these binary opposites. Now, when I talk about these binary opposites, I'm talking about these opposites selectively. So over a period of time, we have come to look at the other from very many views. For example, the other as a different race, a different nationality, or a different religion, or a different social class altogether, or as someone subscribing to a different political ideology, or even someone with a different sexual orientation as the other. So, and we have developed a phobia towards the other. For example, all over the world, you come across homophobia, for instance, that is rampant. And the act of othering as a manifestation of power relations. And this we can find in most of the literature written down the centuries. So if you happen to read Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, you come across a Shylock, a Jew. The Christians had an inherent antagonism towards the Jews. That is fairly evident in that work, The Merchant of Venice. Now, you go and read Charles Dickens, you'll find the same in Charles Dickens' works, especially in Oliver Twist. You come across Fagans, a Jew who is a cut purse, a pickpocket, who lives in London and who trains the youngsters to become pickpockets and petty criminals. So, but we are interested in something like a race and gender. Today, look at what's happening in the United States of America. They have this movement called Black Lives Matter movement. So within that society, though it is a free society, a society that subscribes to democratic values and principles, and a society that subscribes to the principle of egalitarianism, a society that swears by the slogan of the French Revolution, namely liberty, equality, and fraternity. A society which has erected this huge statue of liberty at the entry port. Of course, it was donated by the French people to the Americans. So even in a society like that, you come across this problem of race, and where for the whites, the blacks are the other. They are radicalized other, or what we call a generalized other. So now we will look into this concept of other and how it has been interwoven into text down the centuries. And as we read this text, we have to become alert to this idea or concept of the other. Say, for instance, if you happen to read Indian novels of recent times, you would come across what we call the marginalized, the subaltern, or people who are suppressed, oppressed in many ways, who are trying to give their voices, to raise their voices against this kind of authority and this kind of dominance, this kind of oppression. So you would read all this in modern novels. I'm not going to specific novels now, but we will try and understand how this whole notion of other is linked to identity politics and linked to subjectivity and linked to sexuality. And again, there it is powerfully linked to relations, power relations between humans or among the humans, and also how it is related to the worldview, how it shapes one's worldview, how it shapes one's idea of self and one's idea of the other. In fact, the term other was with the capital O. It was coined by Emmanuel Levinas. Of course, his concept, this was his concept of ethics, and it is centered on the problematic of the relation between being and which is otherwise or other than being, which is otherwise or other than being. So he tries to pit the self against the other. Self with a small s and other with capital O. Now, this other is that which the self can neither know nor assimilate. Other, the self can neither know nor assimilate. For a male, the female is the other. It's very, very difficult for a man to understand what it means to be a woman. In spite of all your scientific knowledge, in spite of all your knowledge of the biology of being a woman, right, a male will find it very, very difficult to understand what it means to be a woman. Or for a white to understand what it means to be a black. Or for a Jew to understand what it means to be a Gentile. So now the whole notion of self and other, and self which is tied to the concept of subjectivity and sexuality, as I mentioned earlier. So self is equated to what we term ipseity, I-P-S-E-I-T-Y, ipseity. Ipseity means my knowledge of my being. Who am I? What am I? Where am I? And again, this knowledge is related to the knowledge of my body. After all, Freud said anatomy is destiny. So it all depends on your anatomy, your body. So what I call myself, it is trapped in this body. Now, there is this linkage between mind and body, and combined, it forms a very powerful force, and it defines who I am or what I am. So now the term ipseity and alterity. Alterity is the other, who I try to understand, with whom I try to relate myself, with whom I try to engage myself, because every human is basically a lonesome person, a person who is known for his solitariness, and the self is a solitary self, which finds it very difficult to engage itself with others. Now, though the self, through myself, I try to understand the other, but my understanding of the other is very often limited. That is why this whole problem of relationship. Okay, so then there are certain things like we have created certain archetypes. So for example, hero, villain, and hero, heroine. Right. For the hero, the villain is always a detestable other, one to be hated, whereas the heroine is a desirable other. Now, this is the model for most of the novels. This is the model for most of the works, where you come across hero and villain, hero and heroine, and we have powerful archetypes to back up this kind of study. For instance, look at the story of the Ramayana. You'll find Rama and Sita who are devoted to each other, who are loyal to each other, and who love each other so much. And their fidelity knows no bounds. Now, look at that. Now, the whole concept of hero and heroine and the villain who you had to hate, necessarily hate. And we have built these powerful archetypes, and no work of art is an exception. Okay, I'll continue on these lines. So then, apart from this duality of man, woman, or even normal and abnormal, for the normal person, the abnormal person is the other, because you try to define yourself as a normal being. But who is normal? It's very extremely difficult to define who is normal. But we try to construct abnormality with a certain traits, a certain behavioral traits or comportment. And we try to define someone as abnormal and treat the person as the other. Then for the natives, the strangers, the migrants, for instance, whether it is in Canada or in America, for the First Nation people, all the immigrants to their country or all the migrants to their country, they are all the other. So that's how they define people who have come to live in their midst. So then in a military doctrine, so if you look into any military doctrine, it is us versus them. If you are not with us, you are against us. Even in military alliances, this is a very popular saying. If you are not with us, you are against us, the other. But if you look into philosophy and history, say for instance, for the people in the West, the East is always a mystery. The East is something that they found it very difficult to comprehend. Even now, they find it very difficult to understand. So they even built a powerful systematic study of this East-West concept. So they created a knowledge system where they declared themselves the Occidentals, the people from the East as the Orient, the other as the Orient. So you have, even among the Westerners, there are Orientalists who are specialists, who are specialized in the knowledge of the East. So now look at this, something like health and illness. People who are healthy, they think of people who are ill, people who suffer from diseases, who suffer from sickness as the other, because they are not normal. They are not normal by your definition. Or human versus animal, or being versus non-being, right? So animate versus inanimate things, or in eco-criticism and in other criticism, you have nature versus culture, where you treat the nature as the most powerful other with which you have to live and which you find it difficult to comprehend using your rationality. So all these things are present in literature. So every time we analyze literature, we realize this fact that otherness is a fundamental category of human thought. So there is no escaping from this. So a fundamental category of human thought. Say, you may subscribe to certain ideology, and someone who doesn't subscribe to an ideology, you treat the person as the other. So it is the Westerners, especially the Western philosophers who tended to philosophize, they had the ability to conceive humanity in ideal terms, whether it was Plato or people who came after him, including someone like Immanuel Kant and others, and modern day philosophers. So they had this whole concept of an ideal human being and humanity, and those who subscribe to humane values and those who follow human principles or humane principles, right? And those who do not follow these humane values or principles, as the other or as the enemy to their ideological formation. So now as you try to understand other, there comes the whole concept of difference. But difference is something different. According to Derrida, he introduces the term difference, which means differ and also to differ. So now difference, unlike otherness, has no exact opposite, a binary opposite. It has no exact opposite against which the difference has to define itself. It doesn't have an exact opposite. It's only a difference. Now, if you happen to, I told you about this hero villain concept and hero heroine. It's only a difference. Say how this person, the woman is different from the man. The man is a villain. Or that villain could be even another woman. We do not know. But remember, difference is something which is milder. That is why we talk about a radical alterity. When we talk of other, we use the term radical alterity. That is totally at variance with the subject. So you treat this other as something, as an object. Okay, I'll explain it further a little later. And remember, when Thomas Pynchon, when he wrote his Gravity is a Rainbow, this is all about the Second World War and how they tried to create a missile. And now here you come across the anarchic V system, right? He introduces that the anarchic V system that exists, that is anarchic V, that we belong to one category, one group, as opposed to, or which acts as a counterforce to the totalizing they system. Say, now we system and they. So look at this. We define it in such a manner, we and they, us versus them. Now, here the concept of other operates, but there are minor differences. Even within family, there are differences. Within the same community, there are differences. People with the differences of opinion, people with different sensibilities, people with the different doctrinal affiliations, people with the different ideological, ideological means not necessarily the capitalist versus a communist kind of thing. Even within your community, within your society, there may be minor ideological differences. So now we talk of this as differences, mind you. So now postmodernism talks about such differences as playful pluralism. Playful pluralism. But remember, now it's a playful pluralism which may exist within this formation of we, the formation of us. That is possible, right? But there is something called the marginalized otherness. So I'm trying to explain, for instance, if you are young, in our society we treat the young as the norm and the old as abnormal. We don't treat them as normal beings because they are down with sickness, they are down with their old age. Now, take for instance, a novel like Margaret Lawrence, The Stone Age. You come across a very interesting character by name Hagar Shipley. So the whole novel tells you the story of her right from her young age, well into her 90s. And now remember, the world regards a woman as a woman from menarche to menopause. Not even before that, not even after that. Now, here is a woman who is well past her prime and who tries to come to terms with her old age. Now, the world in which we live, we practice something called ageism. Now, what is ageism? We discriminate against the elderly. We simply make it very clear to people this is not the country for the old, right? Even something like a disease like this, COVID-19, which shows no mercy towards the older people, the elderly, right? They become easy targets even for because they lack the immunity. But in this novel, come back. In this novel, you come across a character who wants to prove to the world that I can, but she fails miserably because she can't, because age catches up with her. Your body ages, and even in your own eyes, your own body is devalued, right? And you understand the former I cans, that I can do certain things, you can no longer do that. So now here, the aged people, they are marginalized. They are marginalized in a society. And so are people who come from certain sections of the society. For example, the working class, the proletariat, even among the proletariat, the lumpen elements. Look at the ancient Roman society. They had this clear division of patricians and plebeians. The patricians are the royal class, the ruling class, and the plebeians are ordinary folks, the soldiers, the ordinary elements, the traders, the artisans. So there was this distinction. Now look at the early part of 20th century, the bourgeoisie, the middle class, and the proletariat, the ordinary working class. So now these are all differences within the society, and here also the concept of the other operates, but it operates at a marginal level. At a marginal level. But look at something like race and gender. It is not so true with race and gender. So now first we will look at this whole notion of subjectivity or self. Some of you must have certainly read this beautiful song, that is Song of Myself by Walt Whitman. So in this short song, he says, I will read out the lines for you. He says, I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume, you shall assume. For every autumn belonging to me, as good belongs to you. I loaf and I invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my knees, observing a spear of summer grass. So the same Walt Whitman says, I contradict myself. Very well, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. Now today, defining self or subjectivity itself has become problematic, especially during this postmodern times. Now, at one point, we had this whole notion of schizophrenia, where we have this divided self. Those who have seen this film Onion in Tamil, you may recollect how at one moment someone is very peaceful, calm, quiet. Then the next moment the person flares up full of rage, right? So now schizophrenic characters. But today we have moved away from the simple definition of there is a split within me, within myself, or what I call my subjectivity, and we have all become multiphrenic. Now look at these lines by Walt Whitman. I contain multitudes. This he had written almost 2 centuries ago. Now we have all become multiphrenic. So now a multiphrenic personality, there is a legion within me. So I contradict myself. I do not know who I am or what I am. So when I have this problem of defining myself, except in biological terms, as a male or as a female, I have this whole problem of defining my, what we call in ordinary terms, my personality. So Now, I contain multitude, or I have become multi-phrenic. So, the whole notion of who I am or what I am. Now, in today's identity politics, this has become very significant. Now, what is identity politics? Identity politics is a politics of recognition. Now, given my self, given my identity in the society, say, for instance, there are societies with historical continuity or cultural continuity. And in those societies, it becomes easier for people to define themselves or define who they are or define their, the metaphysic or the metaphysical value that they have. Say, and it's easier for them. But there are societies where other cultures have intervened. Other cultures have intervened powerfully, militarily, economically, and above all, they have intervened culturally, and as a result, there are breakages, there are discontinuities, there are disruptions. Now, given such, India is a classical case. For example, we have this historical continuity when it comes to our culture, but now because of invasions, because of our conquests, so there are other, and people migrated from different parts of the world in waves. So now we have become a multicultural society because of this. And now today, when we try to define ourselves, we define ourselves as a multicultural people. Now, multiculturalism, you look at in recent examples, look at a country like America, look at Canada, look at Australia, look at New Zealand. Now, all these settler colonies. Now, in all these colonies, there were people. There were the First Nations, the original inhabitants of these lands. Then the waves of migrants, when they went there, they took with themselves their language, their culture. Say, even Indians have, and Indians of different denominations, Indians of different religions and different faiths, they have migrated to the West. Now today, countries like America, Canada, Australia, they all swear by multiculturalism. Now, in a multicultural society like this, you read all the diasporic literature, and this diasporic literature focuses on multicultural attitudes and multicultural faith. So now, multiculturalism, it refers to an order of a social order that is prevalent today. And in this culture, there is always a dominant one, and this dominant one has defined the minority ones or the recent migrants as the other. Now, this you would find in diasporic literature. So now I'm concentrating on this word other. Say, my focus is on this word other because this whole process of othering or the whole business of othering is present almost in every novel, except for those regional novels or what we call novels which have thick description, novels that are original, that belong to a particular place. So now, very often, the dominant culture or the dominant people or the dominant, say for example, male. We always talk about male domination, or because all the males, they have a certain opinion about themselves, right? Yeah. As someone who wields authority, someone who controls women or wields authority over women. So as someone who dominates women. So this thought is very much present. Okay, so now naturally when you treat the other, you treat the other as inferior. Here I would like to point out what people talk about let us say this colonialists and the colonized. Say, now, during the time of colonialism, the colonial masters thought of themselves as belonging to a superior race, and they thought of the colonized people as belonging to an inferior race or a subjugated race or subjugated people. Now, the colonialists, with their military power, with their economic power, they had subjugated others. Now, these others, according to their view, were people who were incapable of defending themselves, people who were incapable of putting up a strong fight against these colonizing groups. So, in their opinion or in their view, these people were the inferior people. So, when Frantz Fanon, or even for that matter, Amy Sesher, when they talk about it, these two people are from Africa, and Amy Sesher has given this concept of negritude, for instance. And Frantz Fanon has written this beautiful work, Black Faces and White Masks, saying, in such colonized nations, what becomes the norm for people, the ways of the white people, the culture of the white people, the language of the white people. Now, that becomes the norm, and anyone from the other, that is, from the side of the blacks, they are devalued and they are thought of as inferior. And according to Amy Sesher, when he wrote his discourse on colonialism, he says they are reduced to an object. They are not even treated as a subject, which he calls thingification. Now, according to him, colonization or colonialism is equal to thingification. The other is not treated even as a human being. In spite of the lofty ideals the Westerners claim to subscribe to, the Republican thought or spirit which they claim to subscribe to, they failed as colonialists and treated the colonial subjects as what we call things or mere objects with no life. No, this failure to recognize the other as not flesh and blood human beings, that itself shows that there is some deficiency in our thinking or deficiency on the part of their self. Now, today, the same claim is made by people with a different sexual orientation. Say, for instance, people talk about same-sex marriage, right? You have the homosexuals and you have the lesbians and the gays, who are collectively called the queer. Now, the heterosexuals, for the heterosexuals, these homosexuals are the other, a degraded other, and people who are not normal, and people who are an abomination. Say, especially church and other groups in Russia, they are very powerful and they are against homosexuals because in their sight, homosexuality is something as an abomination. And in the sight of God and also in the sight of men. Look at the colonialists. For them, the colonized people were ordinary folks. So they were people without any culture. Now, look at what Edward Said says in his Orientalism. That he quotes how a Western scholar, he claims, not even a single shelf of book from India or from the Orient, right? Not even the not even thousands of books from a culture like India or China, they are not equal to just one shelf of books in the West. Now, look at the attitude, right? An attitude which is it can be simply termed as supremacist, white supremacy, or white supremacist, or Western supremacy. Now, without even knowing this culture, without knowing the Eastern culture, without learning about this rich culture, you condemn that culture and the practitioners of that culture. So, in their eyes, this other is, yeah, an insignificant other, and something which cannot be treated as equal, other that cannot be treated as equal. Now I recently read how a man in Australia, I think he was a police officer, and now he had the audacity to condemn all people from the third world as third world dullards. Of course, he had to resign from his job, and he was forced to resign from his job for his comment on people from India and elsewhere, calling them as third world dullards. Of course, these were not dullards, mind you. These were the ones who were computer experts, who were IT specialists, they were doctors, and they were nurses, and they were all well qualified and trained people who had migrated from India and other Commonwealth countries to a country like Australia. But this inherent superiority now of not the self, the collective self. And it can be located in the collective unconscious of these people who claim themselves to be dominant. So, now what is the point here? The point here is all these things can be located in a text. So, while we read a text, while we examine a text, we have to keep our eyes open, say, for this kind of treatment of characters. Say, the Nazis paid a huge price for their Aryan supremacy, for the thought of Aryan supremacy. For them, the Semitics and people even within Europe, right, like the Romanians, who were simply termed the gypsies and others. Now, for the Nazis, they were the other, devalued other. Now, Amy Sasha says the same. Franz Fanon says the same. And if a black, he tries to put on a white mask, he cannot become white. He remains the other, a pretentious other who tries to, in the eyes of the dominant people, who tries to act like us, who tries to behave like us, say. When they introduced this English education in India, they wanted to have clerks, they wanted to have people who could work for the colonizers, right? And this was Macaulay's plan, who would use their English, who would talk in their language, but still they cannot become the whites, they cannot become the colonizers, but they can become collaborators. This other can become collaborators, but not co-equals. But not co-equals. Now, mind you, so this you would find in all the colonial narratives. So now, for the West, the third world or the East is something of a homogeneous unit, but that is not true. The East comprises of different cultures. Well, I'm not going into that, but for them, it is other with capital O, the entire East. So now remember, cultural and political identity are constructed through a process of alterity, that is, creating the other. Look at all the political formations in our country. You create the other. That means, right, you are my political enemy, though you are my fellow countryman. You are my political enemy. Now, how they are constructed through this process of alterity. So we have to remain alert to this social construction of our identity, social construction of alterity. But what they miss is the interiority of the other. Now, when I say the interiority of the other, we fail to understand what the other actually stands for. In the beginning itself, I told you And I gave you this small definition by Emmanuel Levinas, who has made it amply clear, abundantly clear. It is very difficult for the self to know or to assimilate the other. Very, very difficult. Say, and time and again, say, it manifests itself through violence. Say, the Americans in between the years 1861 and 65, they fought this civil war. At the end of the civil war, there was this emancipatory proclamation made by Abraham Lincoln. So slavery was abolished. People thought that was the end of it, so that the whites and blacks could live together amiably. But that did not happen. The segregation laws came. The Jim Crow laws came. So the other in their eyes, especially for the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants or vast culture as it is called for the Americans and American whites, in their eyes, these slaves remained no longer as slaves, but they remained as blacks. So it is difficult for you to relate yourself with them. Fine, right. Then these Jim Crow laws were promulgated, segregation happened. Then Martin Luther King Jr. came 100 years later, 1963. Now look at this. Again, violence erupted when they started asking for civil rights. So now it continues to fester, this whole problem of treating the blacks as the other. Now, 1963. Then, of course, they elected Barack Obama, an African American, as the president. They had Condoleezza Rice, a black woman, as the Secretary of State. Colin Powell, a man as Joint Chief of Staff. All this happened. But look at it, after all these years, even in the year 2020, you have a problem with, and still the blacks feel they are discriminated against, and they are not able to join the mainstream, and they are treated as the degraded other. And because the general opinion is, when you create this other, you make sure that you are radically free. I'm using the term, that is, I as an individual am radically free, and so is the other, and that is why you have no meeting point, because you enjoy this legitimation of calling yourself a free being, right? Now, or even to a certain extent you accept. So now accept the other as a free being, right? Now here I would like to remind you the Sartrean concept of the signifying subject and signified other. Now what is this signifying subject? I or we as signifying subject, then the signified other. Now look at that difference. Signifying, his frame is very clear, Sartrean frame. Signifying subject, because in my state, I am a signifying persona, or collectively we become signifying personae, and the other is already signified in your esteem or estimate, because you have this a priori view or opinion about this other, and from which you do not deviate. Say, in ordinary or simple terms, we simply say, this is our preconceived idea or preconceived notion about the other. Okay, the blacks are like this, the Dalits are like this, the poor are like this, the lumpen proletariat are like this, or the proletariat are like this. So now we have this preconceived opinion based on our prejudices and hatred. So now as a result, what happens? We find it difficult to see face to face or see eye to eye the other. But literature helps us to understand, right? Say, what is there a meeting point between self and the other, or ipsiting or alterity? Right. Now, in terms of gender relations, we have established, yes, there can be a meeting point. This meeting point or the point of intersection, or what we call intersectionality, is all about understanding. Now, you understand, and you, with your entire being, say, you understand with your entire being, with your mind and body, you try and understand the other. Now, if that is possible between the, the masculine and the feminine gender, now that is also possible between the whites and the blacks, the whites and the browns, the whites and the yellows. It is possible, or between the browns and the blacks. Say, in South Africa, they have a unique problem. Or even Rhodesia, or in countries like Tanzania, Kenya, and elsewhere, they have a unique problem. Now, it's not always between white and the black, the whites and the blacks. Sometimes it's between the whites and the browns, namely the Indians. See, now for the native Africans, the Tanzanians or the Kenyans or the Ugandans, the Indians are the other. And for them, the Indians in their eyes who are very rich, the business class, people who have gone there and established shops, who have established their business, who are treated, who are thought of as rich people, and who are thought of as people who have come to their country to exploit their resources. They are seen in the same fashion, right, as they did see the former colonizers. So, again, there is this dichotomy between the blacks and the browns, or the Indians. So, in any society and in any community, it is possible. And remember, there is this people's faith in cultural hierarchy. Right, at one point, the elite, right? Now, if you happen to read cultural materialism or Marxism or Marxist thought or philosophy or any of this, all these philosophies are thrived on treating the other, the self and the other, the elite versus the working class, the elite versus the ordinary people, or ours and theirs, the highbrow and the lowbrow. Even in academia, you have this highbrow and lowbrow, right? We are all educated. We have intellectual superiority over others. The others are incapable of understanding. They are incapable of understanding life, incapable of understanding economics, incapable of understanding politics, so incapable of understanding our social order. So we are educated, we are intellectual, so we are superior to the others who are less educated, who are less informed, and so on. And in modern times, the arrival of internet and the information and communication technology, it has created another other. Now the othering is now complete. People who can be digital natives, people who can be digital migrants. Now look at the society now, the current debate, or in the present national debate, right, is all about people who have access to computers and mobile phones. People who have no access, the other section of the society who have no access to computers or mobile phones, especially Android mobile phones. And since education is denied to them and they have no access to education. So this downgrading of the other continues in some form or other, and technology hasn't helped us to completely destroy our human habit of the othering. I'm sure you have been following me in the last few minutes. I'm trying to talk about the different discourses that are available before us. And I'm trying to tell you how we, the construction of we, the construction of I, and the construction of they or them, and how it has happened throughout history. And Finally, I would like to focus on this concept of immanence. Say, the self is immanent in a particular social order. The self is immanent with a certain ideology, with a certain belief system, with a certain land or place, and our identification is complete with our land, our culture, and our space, and our literature, and many other social practices or cultural practices. Then anyone or any group that doesn't follow ours, right? We simply treat them as different or radically different from us, and we try to establish a kind of incommensurability. What is incommensurability? Because there is nothing, there is no common ground, and there are no commonalities, there are no similarities, and the other remains the other. But literature tries to change this. Say, I was reading books by Zadie Smith. Now, Zadie Smith is a Caribbean migrant who lives in London, who writes great novels. And similarly, I've been reading Chimamanda Adichie, who has been to the United States of America and who has had this first-hand experience of an African black living in America. And there she says, now an African American is different from an African immigrant. So now how the othering of the whites, now how they treat their fellow African Americans and how they treat the African immigrants, how in their eyes these African Americans, they enjoy the wealth created by the whites of America, and how these African Americans are lazy partners to this wealth creation, and how, excuse me, and how these Africans, the blacks who have migrated, have migrated from Africa, that is from poor African countries, have become some sort of freeloaders in this country. So in their eyes, now there is a new category of people. There are two others. Okay, the African American has one group of others. Then this African immigrants is another group of others. And now with the American presidential election around, the attention is on Indians. Okay, now you know the vice presidential candidate is one, Ms. Kamala Harris, who has her roots here in down south, right, especially in Tamil Nadu, and she is partly an Indian, partly an African, and the challenges she poses to Donald Trump is really formidable. Right now, in the eyes of these people, who is other and why should we constrict the other? And there is a saying, if there is no enemy, create an enemy. Even if there is no other, create one, so that you can define who you are. You can define what you are and your place in the world. Now, literature goes one step further, and it says these are all imagined communities. Now, Benedict Anderson, you must have read. Now, these are the imagined communities that we create, the imagined communities in which the inhabitants are the other. So, now, finally, one man's imagined community, that is another man's political prison. Right, I will stop here. You go and read some of these theorists, you will understand the whole concept of other and the whole concept of cultural hierarchy and how down the ages people have created and a kind of a facticity. And I want to use this facticity about self, facticity about subjectivity, facticity about sexuality, And this facticity is known only to me. I am the facticity of the situation. Okay, so the point here is, as Simone de Beauvoir says, coming of age. Say, most of the novels are about coming of age novels. This is from one state of knowledge to another state of knowledge. So now, as you move from one state of knowledge to another state of knowledge, and you need to have your sensibility, right? And today we are called to have a sensibility which could be simply defined as cosmopolitan. Now, what is cosmopolitan? With that, I will close. Now, this cosmopolitan sensibility is your ability to relate, to your ability to understand the other in spite of the difference. Your ability to understand and relate and accept in spite of the differences. So now, this is something that the literature tries to promote. A cosmopolitan thinking, a global citizen. You may come from different localities. You may come from different what we call localized regions, but you are all part of this universe. Whose universe? Our universe. The universe of the human beings. In this universe of human beings, what can join us together or what can keep us together is nothing but the spirit of cosmopolitanism. So now, to achieve the spirit of cosmopolitanism is very difficult, for which you have to shed your prejudices. You have to shed your pride. It could be your national pride, it could be your racial pride, it could be your gender pride, it could be any pride, and it could be of any prejudice. And when a human being rises above this level, that person becomes an exemplar. Now, societies should march and reach a stage where there is a refinement of the soul, a refinement of the mind. It is not simply that you are an egalitarian and you subscribe to egalitarian belief. Much more. And to reach that, the self has to diminish its importance. Right? Our Indian philosophy clearly states this. Right? You have to suppress your ahankara. Right? Now, you have this ahankara vimuddha atma. Now, what is this ahankara vimuddha atma? Something that has left or forgotten are the ego or the self. Now, when we suppress the self or suppress the ego, or we suppress our importance in the state of affairs or our place in the world, then we can relate ourselves. And literature today moves towards that, and it should move towards that. But on the way, it tries to highlight this self and the other. And when it does so, you hear multiple voices emerging from a text. And this voice is certainly a polyphonic voice. You can hear the voice of a racist, you can hear the voice of the queer, you can hear the voice of the bourgeois, you can hear the voice of class. And today, in a multicultural world, in a multicultural setting, or when nations and people swear by multiculturalism, it certainly promotes a new social order, and thereby it promotes a new world order. And this social order leads to a world order, and that world order should be acceptable to all. Okay, and it will become acceptable to all when our concerns are for the world, when our concerns are, say, when we talk of the world as one, when we talk of the world as a family, right? Now, in spite of the differences, if you are a family, there are differences within the family. But in spite of the family, and you cease to have any hatred towards the other, and you stop indulging in activities which will result in the devaluation of the other. Okay, so if you do so, then, if you do so means I'm not preaching. If literature, when literature does that, we will create a society based on principles, which can be simply called dharmic principles, and principles which can bring humans together, which can keep us united together, and which can keep us united together in hard times like this. Right now, the world now realizes the pain. I don't think we have. The world has faced something like this unitedly at any point in time. So now we are facing an invisible enemy in the form of a virus. So now we are all united in our mission. We are united in our efforts. We think of ourselves as one community, the world as a single community in its united fight against this viral attack. Right? I do not know. So maybe we have to confront environmental problems, climate change issues. There are so many things. Now, unless this formations are collapsed, like a self, other, and things like that, a new formation will emerge. And that formation will be one that of a family, the world as a village. Though we have this concept of global village, there are micro-global villages everywhere. Okay, so in all these micro-global villages, we all act as one. We stand as one, and shedding all our hatred, shedding all our differences, and trying to accept one another. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you so much. I thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir, for your brilliant lecture. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Shall we move on to the question and answer session, sir? Will you take a few questions?
Yes, I will answer that. Yeah, I'm ready.
Sir, there was a question which was posted earlier in the chat stream, much earlier.
Yes, sir.
What do you think about the difference with regard to the concept of the other in the psychological and sociological perspective? How would you differentiate the other in both these perspectives?
Same. Let me talk about the psychological first. Now, there is an other within me. For example, we talk about the ego and alter ego. Now, look at the psychologically, look at the term alter ego. Now, the alter ego is something that it is within us, and within me, there is this otherness. So, it is not the other as something external or something outside of me. This other is within me. So, in simple words, we call it alter ego. Right? Now, ego and alter ego. Now, look at this. Id and superego. Now look at the id. It is full of dark impulses. Now look at the superego, which tries to control this id. For the id, the superego is the other, the alter, which is the counter. Now for the ego, the alter ego is the counter force. So within me, the other is operant. It operates within me. So now look at when Freud talks about the pleasure principle and the reality principle. Now, when you talk about the pleasure principle, which tries to diminish pain and enjoy, but the reality principle offers a counter check, a balance. Now, which is the powerful other within me. Right. Now, I can go on like this. that is the other, which is purely psychological. Now, sociological, I think I have told you quite a lot during the course of that lecture. Now, sociological, well, say, it may be in our workplace, it may be in our neighborhood, it may be in our homes, it may be in our country or in our state, right? Say, take for instance, in a game of tennis, you have this powerful opponent, the other, against whom you want to win a match because he is a champion and you are not yet a champion. But for him, that person is an ideal against whom, an ideal whom you adore, at the same time against whom you want to win a match. Right. Now, the powerful other in sports, it could be in any field, it could be anywhere, and we always compete with this imaginary other. Now, look at sometimes the other is real, and sometimes the other is not real, and it is there only in our imagination. So, I think I want to recollect what S.T. Coleridge had said once about mechanical fancy and organic imagination. See, for him, the fancy and imagination, they occur within the human mind, within the mind of the poet. But he talks of fancy as something mechanical, a mechanical fancy, and organic imagination, and they compete with each other. Right? So, now, within me also, there are competing forces. Outside of me also, there are competing forces, and I label that competing powerful force as the powerful other. Okay, I do not know whether I have answered you. I think to a certain extent,
Thank you, sir.
Right.
So the next question is on your screen, sir.
Right. Has realization of the other led to a lot of creativity in writing throughout the ages? Yes, this is precisely my point. Down through the ages, okay, it has led to a lot of creativity. See, for instance, the whole concept of good and evil, which you find in every, see, for the good, the evil is the other. See, now, for instance, look at all these religions, right, beginning from Zoroastrianism. Right, Zen Avesta, the holy book for the Parsis, it talks about Ahura Ben Mazda and Ahirman. Ahura Ben Mazda is good, Ahirman is evil, the other. Look at Judeo, Christian, Islamic religions. God is good, right? An epitome of goodness, epitome of love, an embodiment of all the virtues, God. Look at Satan, right? An embodiment of evil, right? An embodiment of all the vices. So, the degraded other is the devil, right? Now, look at all the religious texts, whether in the writing of a religious text or even in writing of literature, for that instance. See, is there any novel or a play where you don't come across a villain? I think I made the point early, where there is no evil. In every work, the good triumphs over the evil. The good finally defeats the evil. Look at all the films, Hollywood films, or all the films that we produce. It does lead to plenty of creativity. It is the same concept, the other, the powerful other, but it is repeated again and again without any exhaustion. And that means there is plenty of creativity. Sorry, I don't have the time to refer to all the literature that were produced.
Thank you, sir.
What about the concept of treatment of natives treated as other in one's own land? Fine, right. Now, this is a significant question. This is also a very highly debated point. See, especially the fourth world literature, right? Uh, which of course talks about first world people or first world narratives. In their own land, they are treated as aliens. We treat the other as aliens. We treat the other as different. But the people who belong to the land which you have inhabited, by deterritorializing them. Look at the Spanish Catholic culture or Portuguese Catholic culture, which was an invasive culture, which went to South America, which displaced the Aztecs, the Incas, and the Mayans. The Aztecs, Incas, and the Mayans, they were the three great nations of South America. So their native religion was deterritorialized. This culture went and implanted itself. Then after 2 or 3 centuries, the natives are today treated as inferior to the dominant culture of these countries now. Now, this is the paradox in history and also the tragedy in history, now which we try to bring we try to restore the dignity. And who has to restore the dignity? And who has to restore the dignity and self-respect of these First Nations? Only writers can do that. Politicians, they may not come forward. They may do some lip service, but literature can do that, and people are doing it. And many writers, not necessarily writers from First Nations, or writers of what we call the natives, writers from among the natives, even others, right? They try to bring a social equilibrium. We call that a social equilibrium. Now, what do we mean by social equilibrium? Where this First Nations or natives and the immigrants and the colonizers or the settlers are the new categories of people who have migrated and who have occupied the land, where they can strike a social equilibrium. Now, this social equilibrium is very important. Again, when I ended my lecture, I said we need to have this cosmopolitan thinking. And there is something called identity assertion, which is happening on the part of the natives. This is good. This identity assertion. We are proud of our lineage. We are proud of our ancestry, right? Let alone the fact that we were the original inhabitants of the land. We want our dignity to be restored. We want our ancestral practice to be restored. Yes, it's happening among the Aborigines. It's happening among the Maoris, where the people, the colonizers, the settlers, now they have offered or they have tendered apology for their ill treatment, for taking away their land, for taking away their culture, for altering their culture. Now, this is a process that is going on, where governments and leaders and cultures, or the so-called dominant cultures, people from dominant cultures, have tendered their apologies. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Right. Next question. Hope I'm answering you all. How literature solves the problem of otherness? Okay. Now, this problem cannot be solved entirely or in its entirety. See, as long as the human differences are there, as I have pointed out to you, the otherness will remain. Okay. See, when you speak, when there are so many languages, when there are so many cultures, when there are so many religions, in our case here in India, there are so many caste groups, right? Regional groups, subgroups, subcultures. The otherness will not go away from our midst. The otherness cannot be banished from our midst. And the thought of otherness cannot be completely dismantled also. So what I'm trying to say is, now learn to live with otherness with a sense of acceptance. Right. So with a sense of acceptance, well, with a sense of difference, it will not go away. We cannot wish it away just like that. Say, maybe I can use this term of a working solution. Now, what could be the working solution for the otherness to disappear in our midst? Look at, I mean, we Indians, we have plenty of examples. Look at our government. Look at our central government, our state governments, many of this, our employment, national level of employment, whether it is military, whether people from all parts of the country, they are drawn together. They all work together. They are there. You walk into any office, people would like to find out, yeah, are you Madrasi, right? Are you Bengali? Are you from Odisha, right? Are you a Kashmiri, right? Fine, but we are all together in a given office or in a in a corporate office. It could be, why should it be a government office? It could be even a corporate office, right? People from all parts of the country, they live together. They, or go to our mega cities like Mumbai or Bengaluru or Chennai or to the Delhi or Kolkata. You go to any of our cities, they are all cosmopolitan cities. They are not merely metropolitan cities. They are all cosmopolitan cities. So there we live in the same locality, we live in the same neighborhood, right? So we have to a certain extent created cosmopolitan individuals, a cosmopolitan society, where your next door neighbor may be someone who has a different value system altogether, or you recognize that otherness. You recognize their otherness in your midst. So recognition and acceptance, I think those two things are very crucial. The same thing is happening in a country like America. You go to New York or you go to Melbourne. I was in Melbourne in Australia, and Melbourne boasts of 114 different nationalities. 114 different nationalities. Millions of people being together, right? Accepting the otherness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We will come to the end of the Q&A session with that. I kindly request Dr. Rama, ma'am, your kind comments, ma'am.
Sir, thank you so much. And I think all of them will agree when I say that what is mind blowing about Dr. Bennett's lecture is the explanation, that is explicit and exhaustive explanation with umpteen number of examples about the concept of other, not just geographically or physiologically, racially, culturally, socially. He even said medically, and now he's come to the explanation even technologically. So I think it was. He also had this new concept which he told us about ageism, and he's thrown light on the concept of others, which was probably least thought by many of us. So, sir, I'm so thankful you set us really thinking, and that we must rethink whether we need to have this egoism or ahankara, as you said, because we need to be more humane, especially during this present trying time. Thank you so much, sir. We are extremely indebted to you for an excellent presentation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Shall we move on to the formal vote of thanks, ma'am? I kindly request the event coordinator, Assistant Professor of English, Department of English and Other Foreign Languages, Ms. M. Nathiya, to deliver the formal vote of thanks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. A very good afternoon to one and all. I deem it honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks today. First, I would like to extend a special thanks to the SRM Institute of Science and Technology for giving us an opportunity to organize this event. I extend my heartfelt thanks to the Honorable Chief Guest who presented a wonderful webinar for us. Thank you for spending a valuable time of your busy schedule, sir. The way you explained the topic is exemplary, sir, and that is extremely relevant on the concept of other in literature. I also wish to express my gratitude to our Delta Dean, VP Academic, and VP Admin for providing encouragement and support. I am very thankful to our HOD, Dr. V. Rama, for guiding us in the right way to make this webinar a successful one. A special thanks to you, ma'am. I heartily congratulate all the participants for their active participation in this webinar. As no program can become successful with just a single person's effort, I extend my special thanks to my colleagues and all volunteers for their support. And my sincere gratitude also goes to Dr. Walter and Ms. Preeta, assistant professors, Department of EFL, SRMIST Ramapuram, for all the technical support and guidance. Once again, I thank you all for being with us this morning. Have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you all. Thank you,
Thank,
sir.
Thank you, ma'am. With that, we
Thank
come
you.
to the end
Thank
of
you,
the
Doctor.
session, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Benet. Thank you so much.
I think we had a lot of, though we had a lot of questions, we couldn't do. There were a lot of questions. I hope that we get back in some way to the participants. Thank you so much, sir.
okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks for all of your initiative. All right. I wish you all success in the coming days too, the next 2 days. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sir.
Right. Shall I take leave now? Right. Shall I take leave of you? Okay.
Yes,
Thank
yes.
Thank you.
Walter. Walter, I'll make a move.
Yes, ma'am. You can. Okay, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Shall I?
Yes, ma'am. We can leave, ma'am.
Okay, okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, ma'am.